following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
Yeah, it was slow going initially, but we did start to get people that were interested in what we were doing. And so the first real kind of breakout was ETH Berlin.
GRTiQ podcast.
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time. Lost between the past and future.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Rodrigo Coelho, Chief Spirit Officer at Edge and Node. This is part 2 of a 2-part series we recorded at the House of Web3 in San Francisco, California during the Graph's recent 3rd birthday celebration. You can watch a video recording of this interview on the House of Web3's YouTube channel, and I want to apologize in advance for the audio issues. Some parts of this interview are difficult to hear. Rodrigo was the first hire Yaniv, Brandon, and Jannis, the founders of the Graph, made when they launched the Graph. And since that time, Rodrigo's become an instrumental part in growing the Graph ecosystem and community. During today's episode, Rodrigo talks about what happened after he met Yaniv at a co-working space in San Francisco and what he was working on right before the formal launch of the Graph. He'll also talk about some of the experiences he had being employee number 1 and going to work on the Graph long before anybody really knew what it was, and attending different hackathons and getting a sense of some of the excitement and enthusiasm for what the team was building. As I said last week during part 1, I've wanted to interview Rodrigo for a long time, so I appreciate that he gave us so much time, and I want to shout out the House of Web3 for providing the space and equipment to record this interview. What are those first contacts with the market like? You've received the pitch deck, you met Yaniv in San Francisco, and now you're out actually communicating it.
Exactly.
What are you hearing?
Well, in that, an interesting part of the story, and back to Rick Burton, he had written a Medium blog post that was like, he was building Balance at the time, which is like a wallet. And it was sort of this like this article that was just, he was highly frustrated about how he couldn't get a wallet balance. He was like, why can't we not figure this out? Right. And he explained the problem with blockchains is that you have to go back through the entire history of the blockchain, go through every transaction to just get the current state of like one particular address. And so, so we had caught wind of that article while we were working on it. And then, we planned to meet in person in Toronto, but it was like, hey, we're working on this. Like, thank God. So he became one of our like big supporters at the time. And he was spreading the word and like, solution is coming. We need indexing and querying. And the problem hadn't really been apparent, or it had just a few people had started to realize the problem. And that's what like Brandon and Yaniv had realized. They were doing consulting projects prior to starting, where they were, I think they were hired to build, something for some project. And that's where they encountered the indexing problem that led to the Graph. Was like, hey, this is a problem that every developer is having. They're having to reinvent the wheel. They're having to build, their own kind of custom cloud server that's like ingesting all this. And they were like, this is crazy. Like, why don't we just, make a protocol out of this? And they looked around and no one was doing it. So we're there to just do it. So then at that EdCon, it was, telling people. So the reception was really good. They were like, we need this. So it was validating, to the idea of what we were working on. So met great people there. And so, it was slow going initially, but we did start to get like, people that were interested in what we were doing. And so the first real kind of breakout was, ETH Berlin. I want to say maybe that was like a year later. And we'd had a larger team then, a lot of like the original team there, Carl, Nena, Dave, Ford, et cetera. And yeah, we all went out as a group, and that was kind of the first time we had put out in the wild, like Graph Node and like let people build on it. So, we got teams that were building on it at ETH Berlin, and we were up all night, like fixing bugs. Jannis was like, they were in the code, like making it work and getting it to work. But
You guys are hackers.
We were hacking like all night. And there's great photos from those days where, people are passed out on the floor, you get sleep wherever you can. We were definitely like those people that were doing that. And, so we got a great reception there, and it was just sort of like building strength on strength.
When did you kind of capture a vision for what you were working on? Because as I understand the context of it, you were at a pivot moment in your life. You had gone out to Joshua Tree. You had this experience of manifesting some dreams and ambitions, and you made contact with Yaniv. So you were a little bit looking for your next thing, but you probably didn't know you were walking into something that would become what the graph was. When did that happen? And did it happen slowly, or was there a moment where you're like, oh, wow, this is more than I thought?
Yeah. I did actually, I have to say, like, I kind of was a believer throughout. I did think it was going to be like a big thing, and I felt the importance of it. And yeah, actually, I don't think anyone kind of realized, or at least for me, like I felt, my sense of scale of it was, definitely like I was way under where it's gone and where it has been in terms of like, today we have parties happening around the world, and like I'll see on social media, like people in like graph swag and taking the initiative on themselves to like host a gathering and meetup to tell other people about it. I mean, that just like still blows my mind to this day that people like care, are so interested and believe in it enough. So yeah, like thinking back to those ages, now it's going to be 7 years, like here in March, which I can't even believe.
Which a lot of people don't fully grasp, right? The graph has been around in its form 7 years.
Yeah. We celebrated, the third birthday, but that was when we launched the network, right? Like there were years prior leading up to that point, that of building. So yeah, to see it today where, like yourself, like you were doing the podcast on your own, like months, no pay, just like, hey, you're a perfect example of this. Someone who has a full-time job, but is like so intrigued by this on the side that they're like, I'm going to do this because I love it and I'm interested. And then it becomes a thing. And like, here we are today, like talking about it.
And
like,
one of the hooks for me was when I was researching the project, how long people were working on it. So, that's something I've never talked about publicly, but for sure, when I came across the graph and I looked up the founding team and realized how long they'd been working on it, I thought, well, there's something here. In addition to the fact that I thought the problem they were addressing was super interesting. But
yeah, and you were, because I remember when you were just getting started, we had a conversation like early days. It might have been before you started or after you just hired.
It's been early.
Yeah, it was early. And I remember you were in a totally different industry. You were in like,
I was a normie out there in Web2 / traditional investments.
Yeah.
Just trying to see what was going on here.
Yeah. So I was, really taken by that. And I still to this day, I'm taken by stories of people that are just like, that are just so passionate and interested in it. And, we're changing, like people's lives are changed as a result, and it really is humbling to see this and how far it's come. And this is, one of those kind of out there concepts. But like for me, I sort of reverse what's happening here. Like that we are in service to the idea. So the graph or this actually wanted, like the universe or whatever wanted this to exist. And we were all sort of the vehicles in which like this could become manifest in the world. So, like who could have predicted that, me bumping into Yaniv at that time and like all the things that had to happen in order for this thing to happen, right? Like it's incomprehensible, but here we are. And it's, when you kind of take it all in and just see, all the connections and people that it's brought and the things that have happened. It's
So you're this interesting guy who's an entrepreneur, and you told your story well of how you kind of got started about that in college and university, and eventually found your way to where you are now. What drives you towards that startup environment, right? Because you're clearly a smart guy. You probably could have just gotten in a 9-to-5 job and taken a little bit of an easier path, but you've chosen a lot of entrepreneurial ventures.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the way I phrased it, actually, I heard this, I think it was from Mark Cuban once, and he's like, you only got to be right once. And so you might as well swing for the fences. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my sort of like thinking about it. Like, I didn't want to like bunt or like, to use baseball terminology, just like go for a single. Like I wanted to just like knock it out of the park. Right. And so I was going big or going home. So, I had three different startups. So really working at the Graph and Edge was my first job. Like I'd had an internship in college, but like I'd been a founder 3 times. So it was like the first time I actually had a boss. And there's a funny part of it. It's like Yaniv is like, can be a tough manager. And like for the first 6 months, I literally felt like I was going to be fired. Like every time I'd meet with him, like, okay, is he going to fire me this time? Like, he's really hard on like writing, and like part of the community guy thing, I was supposed to like write blogs, and like my first attempts were, not great. I wasn't as versed in Web3 and like and he was just like, like just shot down my writing, and other people on the team know like how like hard his writing. He has a high quality bar
because he's got such devotion to this vision you're talking about.
Yeah. So that was part of my role, was to be like blog writer. And he's like, oh, great. Well, you can't write blogs for us. Like, what is he doing? Yeah. So fortunately, they all felt like, okay, like maybe he's not great for community, but let's switch him into ops, right? We need an ops person. So fortunately, that's where I found like I hit my stride. And so I overtook like, accounting function and like all of that. I'm still to this day, like still involved in like financial matters and admin, Slack admin and like things like that, So I took that role on more, and then in subsequent years, like got more into like people ops and culture as we like scaled, because we went from we had 15 people on the team when we launched the network 3 years ago, and then there was like a massive growth. We went from like 15 to like almost 60 people fast,
and that's just Edge and Node.
That was just Edge and Node. So we so I was doing recruiting and like managing all the interviews and getting people on board. It was a lot of work. And
you hadn't had that scale experience in your other endeavors.
No.
They grew, but this was like
So this was like all new and exciting and fun. And so it was cool to have that experience of not being a founder. Like when you're an employee, like all those kind of worries, like, am I going to make payroll this time, or fundraising as founder and CEO, those were like off. It's like, wow, it actually is great to be an employee. Like you just get your paycheck, and you don't have to worry about these other things that kind of fill your brain as a founder. And there's a little note here, like many people don't know this, but leading up to the network, we had raised just like X amount, and the network launch was taking longer, and we were like, we don't have any more money. So everybody had to take like a pay cut for 6 months. I took an 80% pay cut. Basically, number one, when I first started working, I took like less of a salary than I'd made like probably since college. And then, took an 80% pay cut, more than everybody. And we all were just like heads down focused, working nights and weekends to get the network launched. But so a lot of sacrifices were made on like many people's parts.
Stressful as well, right?
It was stressful. We never had a doubt we would make it. And like, it just goes to like the determination of the team and, work tirelessly. And that still lives in like the ethos of the culture of the team. And, everyone we brought on is, mission focused and like we'll do whatever it takes. We obviously like put an emphasis on like mental health and taking time, but people work nights late to like get something done in time. Like that's, part of it. We still have some of that like startup mentality, even though we're a lot bigger now, and that still, lives within us.
How has your perspective of the impact of Web3 changed since those early days? So you go to your first conference up in Waterloo and you're getting an introduction to Web3, crypto, and what this whole industry means. I think this is back in 2017, 18, somewhere in there. And here we are now. And how has your conviction, your perspective of what Web3 is changed since that time?
Yeah. So the fundamentals remain the same in terms of like why everyone's doing. I think to me, what's changed is maybe back then I felt like this would come a lot faster. And now that I'm further into it, it feels like there's still a long road. So in terms of like this Web3 becoming like an integral part of how, businesses operate and like governments collaborate and, financial transactions happen. Yeah. So I think maybe we thought, it'll be like 5 years and like everyone will be transacting. Maybe it's like another 10 years from now, who knows? But these sort of massive sea changes, I think are harder to predict in terms of timing. And I always kind of give this example of, like the transition to credit cards. So like back in early days, my mom used to like write paper checks, like going to the grocery store.
I remember.
Yeah. And then there was like a huge marketing campaign on like Visa. They sponsored the Olympics, like American Express commercials. There was like a big marketing push to get people to like get used to the idea that this card was money and like don't need paper checks like this. And that was kind of a multi-decade transition. It's not like everyone's like, we have credit cards. And I mean, it took decades for people's habits to change. And so I feel like we're in another sea change like that. And, maybe 2008 with Bitcoin starting. So, we're a little over a decade to that. And it might be another decade or two. And maybe where virtual currencies like stablecoin, or maybe people get more used to transacting that way. Maybe it's like the older generation moves on and like the younger that have grown up with this, and it's more native that you're paying. Like we're now, paying, credit cards are now going away and like you're using your phone now, Apple Pays. Like that's been a more recent change. So then this notion of like different currencies, I think what needs to happen there is, instant swapping. Like say I've got a wallet with, a certain currency in it, but you want to receive it or say Bitcoin to fiat. I think they're doing that. Like you pay in Bitcoin and then the person in the end gets fiat dollars and like the swapping and everything happens seamlessly behind the scenes. So that, no telling like when that time is coming, but we're, everyone's marching towards that and more applications and usage. I think Strike was doing something for like merchants where, on the same kind of device that you used to pay, they were adding a QR code where you can pay. So those things are coming, but I do think it's like the timeline is stretching out, but still in terms of what we're working towards and like, decentralization, unstoppable applications, censorship resistance, self-sovereignty, all those principles are still there. I think that hasn't changed.
What about that original pitch deck then? So if we were able to go back in time and see that original pitch deck on the graph that Yaniv shared with you, first what the graph is today, and of course listeners know the new era was just released, which is a revised roadmap for the future of the graph. How has that vision changed and how much of it has stayed the same?
Yeah. So I think back then there wasn't this whole notion of like multi-chains, like the fact that there's like hundreds of chains now. And I think that was probably not in the original pitch deck. I think back then it was like Ethereum, but no, like I think it was early days that Cosmos was like becoming a thing. Tendermint. I remember that being at like EdCon, but it was still early days. So now the notion of like many data sources, like many different chains, file data sources. I think eventually it's even like non-blockchain. Like why not? Like why not include all this data? And I think the grand vision is that it's indexing all the data, like every bit of data that's out there, the world's data. That may have been in the pitch deck. I can't quite recall exactly, but yeah, I think the vision then remains is like, index and organize all the data and make it available. And that, with what new era, what's happening there, different data services and modular, and that people can build onto and add to graphs permissionlessly. Yeah, it does seem to be like expanding the scope.
Any new venture, anything that launches into the world, it has what I think is like an initial DNA or fingerprint that it sort of has. And of course, things evolve and grow and a community builds around these types of things. But there are some initial artifacts that will always persist. What would you hope, based on the fact that you were employee number one at EdgeNode, what do you hope persists through the graph forever from those early days? I mean, are there certain things that you wish the community will hold on to as part of what we're all about and what people are building in Web3?
Yeah, I mean, I got to hand it to like the founders, especially Yaniv, to like stick to his guns on the vision. Cause, there were people that were like, you're crazy. You should just do this as a centralized business. And he was adamant, like, no, we're not doing this. And they were like dangling, like, here's lots of money if you take this money, and so sticking to principles and mission and saying, you know what, like, thanks, but no thanks. We're like, this is what we're building. So yeah, adhering to the core values and principles, like, of decentralization, of permissionless, and building community, building in an open way, open source. That's been an interesting ride too, to just see how that whole, how that sausage is made, right? Like normally in a business, you work in like a closed environment and you keep like trade secrets and like it's competitive and and this is different. And it's like code is all out there. Anybody can look at it, can like run it themselves. And so it's been really interesting to be more community focused, right? And I think that's another artifact too, is like, we're always saying, hey, if you want to come join and help, like raise your hand. The more people involved, the better. We've seen that, with hundreds, thousands of people now around the world that are playing different parts and people adding, to the code and people like hosting events, podcasts. And so that's the part I really love about it too, is that it does feel like we're all doing this together versus we're just trying to like make as much money as a company and like extract as much value and like hide what we're doing and like compete. And it just has a better feeling in terms of being right with like the world, I think.
When I think about the story you've shared thus far, you're a guy in university who comes across data, picks up SQL, just kind of serendipitously given the moment. Yeah. I see that as a first hook into the importance of data. So naturally, it's serendipitous, if you will. You end up at the graph, which is obviously all data focused. Yeah. But then you have these spiritual experiences as well and things related to your personal health. And now you find yourself in this chief spirit officer at EdgeNode. Do you see that as a culmination of like all that experience? And if you don't mind, just tell listeners what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yes, I do feel like it is the intersection of like all my life experiences coming together in this like moment in time. In a way, it's like what I was meant to do in a way. I mean, life experiences has led me to this, and here I am. And how it happened was in this role. Actually, my former title was chief of staff. which wasn't a perfect fit for what I was doing. And then last year we had a CEO change and Tegan came in and she was kind of like rebuilding the exec team. And she was the one that actually made the suggestion. She's like, I don't really think chief of staff is appropriate. She's like, what do you think your title should be? I was like, I don't know, like chief people officer, but it's not, I don't just do HR, da, da, da. And she's like, I think you should be like chief spirit guide. How about chief spirit officer? I'm like, that's interesting. So shout out to Tegan there. But so yeah, I gave it some thought. I'm like, yeah, this is actually perfect. And I did write like a blog post about it, which is on Edge and Node's blog. But in summary, the word like corporation comes from Latin, like back to etymology of like
Another hook back
right?
into your background.
So it's like corpus, corpse, like it's a body, right? And so we talk about a corporation as like a body, like an entity. It is a person per se, even according to like law, that it's a person. And so in that respect, like, you could think of the people as making up like the cells of the body. And so who's tending to like spiritual, emotional health of that person? And that's what like essentially the chief spirit officer is. Like when we talk about a company, what's it like to work there? It has a personality, like it's really fun or it's really serious, or so it becomes this like living entity per se, based on like the actions of all the collective group. And so, yeah, the chief spirit officer is like, how are these different groups working together? So I check in with everybody every quarter. Like I do calls with every single person on the team. So it's taking a pulse of like how people are doing, how different teams are functioning together. Things escalate, with people issues being like, I have to be a mediator or just sounding board for like vegan or difficult. They come to me with their concerns. So it is sort of like allowing people to have a voice, that they're heard. I guess being like a wise elder. If this were a tribe, it would be like shaman of the group, and it's so it suits me well. And I've told this to many people in the business world, and they're like really intrigued. Oh, this is actually like good concept that I've never thought of before. And maybe it is something that, for companies that are more future thinking or more like,
Hopefully it does.
Hopefully it does. Yeah.
When you think about then this framing of spirit in an organization, and you think about some of the challenges to that spirit of an organization, in Web3, I would put, enemy number one being burnout.
Yeah.
So how in this role are you sort of thinking through or trying to combat, if I'm right, that's kind of enemy?
Yeah. I think we've talked about this a lot, but we place a very high emphasis on mental health within Edge and Node organization. We take a lot of steps to ensure that people are taking care of themselves mentally. We have a stipend that people can apply to mental health for therapy. We've got like a membership to Calm meditation app that people can avail themselves of. We ensure that people take ample time off, like a flexible policy there in terms of getting the time they need. And yeah, burnout comes from different things, but it can be also from like frustration, maybe like of being blocked. You're working on something you care about passionately, but maybe you have like a boss that's like subverting you, or your ideas moving forward, or so we really take that to heart too. And we have ways for people to, we do quarterly engagement surveys. And one of the things we ask is like, I feel safe to speak up, that my voice is heard. And so we're always ensuring that people do feel like they can speak out and have their opinion heard. And yeah, we're really paying attention to all these things. And we have had people that have, taken breaks, like mini sabbaticals and stuff, to just like clear their minds. And we certainly allow for that, when needed. And it is very important to us.
I want to ask you the GRTiQ 10, but before we wrap up, I do want to ask you a couple just final questions. So the first question I want to ask you is stories or anecdotes from those early days. And I'm sure there's a list. In fact, I'm already thinking I want to do another interview with you where all we talk about is stories from the early days. I mean, even in my own mind, I'm already thinking about this Ethereum Christmas sweater and what this must have been like. But what are some early stories or anecdotes that will live on in your mind from your experience of being number one?
Yeah, so many. I mean, there's so many like funny jokes and inside jokes, but like one of the classic stories was, leading up to the public sale back in 2020, we decided to host the platform ourselves. And typically what projects will do will be to like outsource kind of that whole portion to an outside party. We use the platform for a part of it, but then like handled the sale function. We built like a custom app. And so like taking Yaniv, we're kind of like negotiating on it. And it was like on the KYC portion, that was like a large cost, and we were like cutting costs, saving costs on like, oh, we'll handle it. But they like agreed to that, not knowing what it would take. And so they're like, oh, Rodrigo will handle it. Well, I didn't know either what it would take. And so we get into it and like, so we have it set up and like, okay, the platform's set up. We start getting like, we send out the information for people to start up. We start getting like people signing up, and I'm like watching it. And it's like that commercial where they see people like the sales come in. It's like ding, 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 ding. And it was just like literally it was like a few hundred. And I was starting to do them like as they were coming in, and it would take like, a couple minutes each one. And then they started coming in and it was like 400,000. And I was like, my gosh, like, whoa, there's no way I'm going to get through this. I had like 2 weeks to get it done. It was like a hard deadline. And the numbers kept coming higher in the thousand. And I started to panic. I was like, oh my God. And it was all on me. And I had to I was literally realizing like it's impossible. Like there's physically not enough time to finish the amount of people coming in, and had to like quickly call on every favor, scramble, get people, build a team of people to like get them trained and get through this process. And like literally I was like working like nights, weekends. And I remember I was so stressed out. I got like a strange like shoulder injury where I literally was in like a sling, like in my bed, like doing the KYC, like, so anyway, it was this like intense 2 weeks that we literally finished. It was like down to the minute where we just wrapped our final ones, because it was like gathering from everyone else, delivered. Yaniv actually like went through we had a questionnaire that was part of it. So we were asking people's involvement and things like that. And so Yaniv actually, to his credit, went through all of them, thousands of them, and like picked. We had different tiers. I think it was 1, 2, and 3. And so putting people in different buckets, a ton of work in like a compressed amount of time, and so stressful, but we got it done. And that's just like one example, like the Herculean efforts that we had to put out to like to get things done throughout. Another time was early days, everyone was working remote, but we would do these offsites, and we were a small enough team to like fit in one Airbnb. And like I was always in charge of like going and get groceries and like being like the house mom and like, guys, pick up, like, can you pick up your cup? And I recall one trip we did to Lake Tahoe, and it was like Eva's first day. So she had just come on, and I remember the next one after that was Martine's first time. And so it's been really cool to be in this position to like have seen the first days of like everyone that has come on, really, because I've onboarded everyone that's kind of come on the team. And so that's been a really like fun aspect of being here so early, is like seeing when they come on and are like excited and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then to see how far they've come, like yourself included, where coming in not knowing, and then just being like experts, in their whatever they're doing and speaking on it so well, and people that like weren't crypto native are now super into it, and yeah, it's super, super cool to be part of that.
I think when from doing all these interviews, when I think back to kind of the superpower, the unlocked early days, it was that talent acquisition, the ability to kind of identify talent. And of course, Yaniv got it right with you, and it's kind of followed downstream from that ever since. So super impressive. I want to ask you this other question about spirituality, right? And you are Chief Spirit Officer at Edge and Node. We've talked a little bit about how you got that role and why that's meaningful. I want to ask you, based on the experiences you've had, what's the one thing that people most misunderstand or neglect about spirit, right? Whether they're religious, whether they're spiritual or not, there is an essence that you might call spirit in everybody. Yeah. What do we most misunderstand about that?
So I think what people should understand is that all of these different like major religion, spiritual texts are kind of pointing to the same thing. So, the Bible, the Quran, they talk about, they name God or whatever, but it's sort of like speaking about the same like essence and unknowable things in different terminology. And so that was one thing I gathered from everything. And like we all kind of experience it and feel it ourselves. And, there are atheists that like don't believe, but there's like an undeniable like presence and awareness that we are all, that we all have, that we're aware of. And it's just a matter of language on it. And so one of the areas the rabbit hole I went down into was this, was non-duality. Non-duality, it deals with the fact that it says there is no other. There's only that. There's I am that, and that's the only thing that is that awareness. Presence awareness is kind of what it's called. That the visible manifest universe exists in presence awareness. So that is like what is primary. Without presence awareness, there would be nothing, right? You need awareness to perceive something that's there, right? Like a plant, a table. There's an awareness there. Like it's almost like the surface of the mirror upon which the reflection happens. Like that has to be there. And that is what's primary. And that's what's even primary to thought itself. And so you couldn't even have a thought without a manifest base level of presence awareness. And so with non-duality, the only thing that language does is it separates. So, when you're a child, one of the first things that happens is you get a sense of I. Like a toddler is sort of, or a baby is flowing with its awareness. There's no separation between itself. And then there's a period where there's a distinctive sense of I that comes up. We call it ego. And and then there's me, mine, right? And yours. So there's this separation that happens. And language itself is devised in such a way in which it divides that there's like subject and object. So, like I see this, and then it harkens back to like, what is this I'm talking about, right? And most people say, well, I am like, I'm my body and my mind, right? But like we see, like, cut off your hands, your arms and legs. Are you less of you? Like, what is you, right? And so when we deal with language, it's like there are words to separate what is in essence like a sea of energy, of different like waves of energy. So like I can say like this is a microphone and this is a table. And we know from like the study of quantum physics that nothing ever really touches. Like when I touch my finger, like if you zoom down in to like sub-microscopic levels, there's literally just an interaction of like two fields that are like repelling. There's no like touching happening, right? It's just like this repulsion and you register it as like an electrical signal, blah, blah, blah. But yet, so when we use words, we're separating what is like a field of like this invisible energy. And it's similar to like, you look at the ocean, there's like a continuous ocean with like ripples, and you see like, say there's a curling wave on it. You're like, that's a wave. But like, where does the wave start and where does the wave end out of the continuous whole? So that's a metaphor for like, we are like that. We're like a wave in this continuous whole. You, Nick, the chair, the table, it's almost like different ripples on the surface of the water. And it's like the vibratory pattern, like form thing, but it like really is a continuous thing. And that's like what presence awareness is. But that's also the feeling, it ties back to the feeling that we get inside of like, of awe, of love. These are, to me, of reverence. I think that those are fundamental to like the universe itself. I think creation happens out of this like blissful experience, and like, different traditions talk about Ananda, like in the Hindu tradition, this sort of like blissful state. Even if you think of like the act of procreation, right? It happens in this like orgasmic, like blissful experience. So I think, and there's a tie, to that sort of energy, that sexual energy and creation. And that goes into, different cultures, Kundalini, et cetera, of like tapping into this like life force. So I think we all have an experience of it, and it's just the wording on it varies. But, I do think we're all one and the same. We all have this understanding. It's just how we, mentally put our frame on it.
And I think the last question that I want to ask you is about, again, relating back to spirit, but the spirit of Web3 then. So
yeah,
you are working within the graph at Edge and Node, one of the core dev teams, but the graph exists within the Web3 ecosystem, the Web3 industry. How would you describe what the spirit of Web3 is? Kind of why that's even important?
Yeah. So, if we were to talk about Web3 as like a person, like a thing, I would say it's, it has this youthful spirit to me. Definitely like skews younger in terms of just like age of people that are in the space that are attracted to it. It has a certain idealism, certain like principled nature to it. So definitely like hyper intelligent and not stagnant. So like eager for change. And so I would describe it as like a person of that kind of nature and spirit. And yeah, and it is like an outgrowth of things that have happened before it, and a reaction to things in the world. So like governments and censorship and, how money is handled and fiat money. And so it's like it's an awareness of its space, and like similar to like how a tree in an environment would like grow in a certain way because of like the environment it's in. Sort of like Web3 is like a natural kind of evolution of growth of, simply the world that we're in, and like where technology came and understanding of different things. So it is, to me, like something that I had mentioned earlier is like something that wanted to exist and needed to exist. And like everyone that's come to it is like the ways in which it can become manifest.
Incredible. Yeah. Well, super exciting stuff. I really appreciate that you would come and do this interview. I want to do it again. I want to go through all the stories from the early days. And of course, we didn't have time to cover it all today. But if I would have interviewed you when I first asked, I wouldn't have had the GRTiQ 10. It's a newer thing. And by virtue of the fact that we were a little delayed, I get a good fortune of being able to ask you these questions. And so I created the questions because it gives listeners an opportunity to kind of learn more about you, but it also, I think, provides listeners with a way to learn something new, try something different, or achieve more in their own life. So are you ready for the GRTiQ 10?
I'm ready.
The GRTiQ 10.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
So what book or article has had the most impact on you?
So early days, I got into like yoga. That was one thing I forgot to mention in my college experience. So freshman year, I took a yoga class, and it was like before yoga was cool. It was in like a gymnasium, and like this old teacher who'd studied in India and da da da. And so around that time, I picked up the book Autobiography. So that book was really influential in my life. Interestingly, another fun fact is Paramahansa Yogananda has my same birthday. So I remember reading that and I was like, whoa, that's an interesting coincidence. And so that book was kind of one of the first like spiritual books that, subsequently led to many others beyond that. So, I would say Autobiography.
How about this one? Is there a movie or a TV show that you think or would recommend everybody should watch?
Yeah. I always like to say The Matrix because, that movie was based on like Buddhist kind of philosophy, the whole like red pill, blue pill thing. And, that we exist in this kind of dream state. And then like you take the red pill and like you wake up to everything that is actual reality. And so I feel like I kind of, through my like near death experiences and whatnot, I had this sort of like red pill experience of like waking to the kind of truth behind the scenes. So then we've seen it more recently with like what's happening in the world and whatnot, and like information coming out, and it is like, whoa, like a red pill, like, okay, this is what's really happening behind the scenes.
If there was only one music album that you could listen to the rest of your life, one would you choose?
Yeah. Anything from 07. Like it was actually probably early 2000s era band. Sia was in it actually before Sia. Super like vibey, chill music. They have an album called Simple Things, or just I could listen to that like forever.
Incredible. And how about this one? What's the best advice someone's ever?
Man, there's so many. One of the more recent ones, there's a couple, I'd say. One of the more recent ones was this video from Jocko Willenick, who's like this Navy SEAL, like bald, like tough looking guy. And he has this short clip that's, you can find it on the internet or Twitter, like him saying, it's basically like good. Like whatever happens, good. Didn't get the job, good. Didn't get a promotion, good. Broke your arm, good. He's like, you can do better. It's just, so it's a philosophy of like, whatever happens, we immediately go to like, this is so terrible. And there's this Zen story. I don't know if you heard about the farmer story. Tell it really quick. So there's a farmer, and one day his horses like break out of this stall and they go off and run off, and the neighbors come by and they're like, oh my God, your horses got out. How unfortunate. And he's like, we'll see. And then the next day, the horses come back, and they had brought back a herd of other wild horses. They're like, oh my God, you got like 50 more horses. How amazing. And he's like, we'll see. And then the next day his son goes out and tries to like get on the horse and like tame the horse. The horse bucks the son off and he breaks his leg. And they're like, the neighbors are like, oh no, your son broke his leg. How unfortunate. And he's like, we'll see. And then the next day, the army comes by looking for people to draft in the army, and his son's leg was broken. And so they're like, oh, we can't take him, and move on to the next house. And the neighbors are like, oh, your son didn't get drafted in the army. How fortunate. We'll see. So that's the idea, is like everything that happens is like neutral. There's the notion of good and bad in the universe, like, is actually like another mental construct. But really, to the universe itself, like, you know, it doesn't make judgment calls in terms of like, this is good or bad. So like death, you know, we label death as like so horrific and bad, but there's like a balancing life principle, and it's like a neutral thing. Like in the cosmic scope of things, you know, dinosaurs lived and like went extinct, and like how horrible, but like, is it right? Like they lived for millions of years and then they're no longer around, and it's just part of like the natural order of things, right? And this is a hard one for people to get around, is like, you know, but what about war? And like, what about people dying? And like, in this school of thought is like, well, war is part of like the whole cosmic thing, and like the cosmic order of things that has to happen. You know, there's a destructive aspect, like Kali, the destructive force, and then the Shiva and the Shakti and the creative force. And like so that's again, like where different philosophies use different words and terminology or gods to describe cosmic order of things. But in this presence awareness, like cosmic consciousness world, it's neutral, and like everything that happens. So one tactic or way to deal with, you know, another like piece of advice is life is one damn thing after another. So if you take what comes to you in life, like, good, okay, like, you know, I didn't get that done, good, what, like, how can I make this better? So it's a really good philosophy or tactic or strategy of like picking yourself up and just like getting on with it and going. And I found it's actually really been, I've given it to some people, I've used it myself. Stops you from like that initial like, damn, like going negative and, you know, getting into like a downward like spiral. And that can become like, you know, disempowering when you like have to keep, you know, going and doing what you're doing.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people have learned or know yet?
Yeah, so this goes back to the whole like spiritual philosophy of non-duality that I talked about earlier, which is it's not you doing it. So let me unpack that. So kind of when I went through like my couple near-death experiences, I would say that like Rodrigo died. So I had an experience of dying, but in a way, like, and what these spiritual texts talk about is a dying to oneself, a dying to the ego sense of self. And what that means is that it's that you sort of like hand your life over to this presence awareness, a power greater than you, God, universe, whatever you call it. And that it's just a slight shift, but it's like, I'm not actually making this decision here. Like, the universe is making this decision. And there's so many examples of that. Like, why did I decide to move to San Francisco? Like, I don't know. Was it me, or was it like the universe? Like, imagine the graph wanted to happen, right? And like, and you could go back even further. Like, why was Yaniv even born? And like, why does his parents even meet? And you know what I mean? And so it's then becomes like, okay, like I can then be part and parcel of what's happening, but knowing that like it's all in the natural order of things, and like everything's happening perfectly, and it's not really like me doing it. There's even like the Institute of Noetic Sciences, they do a lot of study into like supernatural and phenomenon and stuff. And one of the tests they did was they hooked people up to like brain electrodes, and then they're on a timer, and they're like, at any given moment, just raise your hand randomly, like whenever you want. And just sit there, it could take no time. And so they do it, and they do it a couple times. And then they look at the brain scans, and the brain activity in the area that moves the hand happens milliseconds before the hand actually moves. And so again, it's like, did they like decide to do it, or was there like some signal from somewhere else that was like move the hand? So like when them registering that they like moved their hand was actually after the decision was made. So it goes back to like, where does thought come from? Like it's coming out of this like 0 point field, this emptiness. And like, it feels to me like there's some higher implicate order of coordination happening that we're just like not aware of. It's like a super conscious.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
I'm super into biohacking and nootropics. I take a stack, and in the morning I do this mushroom coffee with like chaga and reishi and L-theanine and caffeine. So L-theanine caffeine is a good combo, which you get like the brain stimulation but without like jitteriness. So it's sort of the L-theanine like calms that. But also like cold exposure. I do like the cold shower thing. I am working on getting like a cold plunge in my house. But like super into like all the biohacking things. Tried out peptides recently. I'm super a fan of those. So yeah, I'm definitely into like biohacking and like optimizing health.
Based on your own life experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains why or how people find success in life?
Yeah, it's a great saying. It's like it's never empty on that. It's never crowded on the extra mile. So I think that's like a great philosophy to live by. Is like people I've found overwhelmingly that are successful are always going above and beyond the call of duty or action. And yeah, so I've seen it throughout my career, and just those that just excel and those that don't, that are just have the if they're asked to do something, it's like, how do they go a little bit more, like I need this by 5, well here it is by 3, or like I got it too early, or those kinds of actions are definitely rare. It's like the less than 1% of people like do that. Another thing is goes back to leaders or readers. I think there's a stat that like less than 5%, maybe less, have like actually read a whole book last year. So I do think there's something in that too. People that like read books are a step ahead, because even if you pick up one thing out of a book, it was well worth, and it might change the trajectory of your life. And nowadays it's easier, I think, with podcasts. Those are great because a lot of authors come on and they share their thoughts that way. So audio makes it a lot easier for people. But so yeah, I'd say those.
And then Rodrigo, the final 3 questions are complete sentence type questions. So the first one is complete the sentence. The thing that most excites me about Web3 is
unstoppable application.
And how about this one? If you're on X, formerly Twitter, you should be following
cultural tutor.
And the last one is I'm happiest when
I am skiing in fresh knee or thigh deep powder.
The GRTiQ 10.
And I show you how deep the
Podcast.
Rodrigo, thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you.
It's been a long time in the making. I've said that multiple times, but it checked all the boxes and everything I hoped it would. And for listeners who want to stay in touch with you, follow some of the things you're working on, especially in this really cool, innovative role you have at Edge and Node. What's the best way for them to stay in touch? And
X is the best way. Twitter at Rod Ventures.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast. Roger that.